Every day we do something that defeats ourselves. I'm going to go through some examples and explain why it's happening not only here in Israel, but around the free world, particularly in the United States, coming up on In Focus. Monday morning, Israelis woke up to the news that, apropos of nothing, the Shin Bet and the IDF released 50 Hamas terrorists from prison and sent them back to Gaza. Now, these aren't just terrorists who, I don't know what, they're people who were either picked up on the battlefield in Gaza or were engaged in other terrorist activities in Gaza against our forces. And the headline of the 50 that were apropos of nothing. We didn't get anything for the release. We didn't get any news of the hostage. God forbid we didn't get any hostages. We didn't get any updates on the hostages. We didn't get any guarantees that they're going to be taken care of and that they're not being starved to death. We didn't get anything on the hostages. We just gave away 50 terrorists. And the headliner of that was that among the 50 that were let out was the commander of Hamas's Shifa terror base, otherwise known as Shifa Hospital, one Dr. Muhammad Abu Samia. Okay, and just so you understand how insane this is, Abu Samia directed Shifa Hospital, right, where they brought hostages, where they held hostages on October 7th and after that day, okay? They held hostages there. Not only did they hold hostages there, they tortured hostages there, and they murdered hostages there. For instance, 19-year-old Noah Marciano, an IDF corporal who was seized as a captive by Hamas on October 7th, along with 5 other female observers from the observers unit in Nahal Oz military base. She was brought into Gaza with the rest of the female soldiers, and she was murdered by a doctor at Shifa Hospital. Okay, so Dr. Muhammad Abu Samia presided over this entire operation. And not to forget that Hamas, on October 7th, Hamas's operational headquarters, its command and control center, were all located at the Shifa Hospital compound. So this is the commander of Hamas's key terror base. He was arrested by Israeli soldiers in battle, right? And he was brought to Israel, where he was incarcerated, and he was just let go. He was just let go. And the question is why? How could this have happened? Who approved this? Why did it get approved? Why is he giving, these smirking, contemptuous press conferences alive and well back in Gaza when 120 hostages are being held there and we're not getting any signs of life? We're not getting anything. And the answer is, well, fourfold. I would say fourfold. So the first answer is incompetence. We have an incompetent system. We have an incompetent prison system. We have an incompetent national security ministry that's responsible for the police. It's responsible for the prisons authority. We have an incompetent Shin Bet. We have an incompetent IDF. We have a bunch of incompetent people who are running this show, and they're a bunch of clowns, and they let people out because they don't have enough place to put them. And so they have to let people out because they don't have enough cells to place them in or tents to place them in detention centers, and so they get let out. Why? Because. No, it's not because. It brings us to the other reasons of why this matters. When you have incompetence all over the place, but you don't have incompetence that actually endangers your war effort, that undermines your war effort, that demoralizes your soldiers who, fought, endangered their lives in order to bring Abu Samia and all these other, 49 terrorists that he was just released with to justice, that get them arrested, that bring them to Israel, to be incarcerated, to be detained, to be interrogated, and to be held because they've committed war crimes. This guy, Abu Samia, committed crimes against humanity at his hospital, right? His hospital was a crime against humanity, the hospital itself. So it demoralizes us. It undermines our war effort. It provides aid and comfort to our enemy in time of war. Why are we doing this? So I said incompetence. That's the first reason. But there's other reasons, most important of which is legal interference. Remember, before this war, we had Israel's elites going to the mattresses, lighting Israel on fire. They're back to doing it today, apropos of nothing, because they claim because we were going to a dictatorship, because the Netanyahu government, the democratically elected Netanyahu government that held and continues to hold a majority of 64 out of 120 seats in the Knesset, right? They decided after running for office on a mandate of enacting judicial reform, they tried to enact the reforms that they had promised to the voters in the elections, and the left went berserk. Why? Because we don't really live under a democracy in Israel. We live under what people have coined the term juristocracy, where we have these unaccountable, self-selected, self-appointed, self-perpetuating legal fraternity that has arrogated to itself all of the executive powers and all of the legislative powers in Israel, apropos of nothing, extrajudicially, with no legal writ. But because they have power and everybody's afraid of them, they get to rule the roost. No, they accept no limits on their power. When the elected government tried to place minimal limits, and I mean minimal, like too small for my taste, right, on their power, they went berserk and set the country on fire with the support of the Biden administration, which was partially funding a lot of their operations. All right, so you have this legal fraternity. One of the key nodes in this legal fraternity that pushes forward with this radical leftist anti-democratic agenda is this organization that's funded by the Ford Foundation, that's funded by the State Department, and that's funded by a progressive Jewish charity, 501c3, called the New Israel Fund in the United States. It's called the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, ACRI. And they keep and how do they work? They work by petitioning the radical justices in the Supreme Court. So sort of a closed circle. You have these foreign-funded NGOs that advance the causes of terrorist enemies of Israel against the people of Israel, against we the people. They submit these petitions that are crazy, that undermine our war effort to the Supreme Court, and then the radical justices who occupy Israel's Supreme Court accept these petitions, set a date to adjudicate them, and then find in favor of the terrorists being represented by these foreign-funded radical NGOs, and demand that the IDF salute and carry out their orders. So, for instance, Israel has a shortage of prison cells for terrorists in our security prisons, in our detention centers run by the Shabak, run by the IDF, run by Israel's prison authorities. And why is this? Because the Supreme Court justices and the NGO and networks have determined that that the prison cells that we have or the detention centers that we have aren't nice enough, aren't comfortable enough. They don't get enough calories. They don't get enough variation in their diet. They need meat, they need potatoes, they need rice, they need salads, they need choices of salads, they need side dishes. What desserts are you providing them with? How many? They're not getting fat and happy enough here. You're not giving them enough variety in their greens. You have to give them more options. They have to have an option. They have to more like a cafeteria. You can't just bring them stuff. And literally, these are petitions that are submitted, and then the Supreme Court comes out and tells the state's attorney, happily accepts these judgments that are complete perversions of justice. While our hostages are being starved to death in Gaza and tortured and held incognito, all crimes against humanity, all war crimes, right? We're expected to give literally 5-star hotel treatment to the people who raped our daughters, who burned our children, who burned our families, who tortured their victims before killing them, right? We're supposed to treat them like they're at Club Med. And because, the IDF and the Shabak and the Prisons Authority haven't been able to build cells that are up to snuff for our legal fraternity, we're letting prisoners out of jail because we can't hold them, because we don't have enough. Where I live in Efrat, we had this incident a couple of weeks ago where I think it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, the first response team gets called up immediately because they saw that there were 3 Palestinians who had entered the community without, coordinating, without getting approval. They had slipped into the community, penetrated into the community. Obviously, this is a security breach. They go in and they see there are 3 people there who claim that they have to tend to their vineyards at 4 o'clock in the morning without, prior approval from the army, which is totally illegal. And what do? Well, there's no place to put them. So they can't be interrogated. They can't be investigated. Who sent you here? Why are you here? Why, what are you doing here? At 4 o'clock in the morning, you're not tending to your vineyards. What are you trying to do here? You can't have any interrogation because there's no place to hold them there. Because why? Because the legal fraternity says that, our prison cells aren't nice enough, and therefore all of these people who are carrying out these serious, and this is a minor security breach. They just entered. They didn't hurt anybody. But we have people burning down fields. We have people entering into communities, threatening them, and there's no place to hold them, so they just get let out with no investigation because there aren't enough cells. Why aren't there enough cells? Well, it works out that we have 1,500 cells in what's called State Teman, which is one of the detention centers not far from Gaza. But our legal fraternity, our Supreme Court, our state's attorney, and all of their friends in the foreign-funded NGO nexus of the New Israel Fund, the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, Moked, all of these other radical leftist anti-Zionist organizations, right? They say they're not nice enough. They don't have draperies on the windows, and so you can't hold them. And so then you have this situation where you're letting out arch terror commanders. You're sending them back to Gaza. And in the meantime, 120 hostages, alive and dead, we don't get any word from them. We're not able to get them home. We have, all of our poker chips, we're just giving up. We're surrendering them. Everything, all the bargaining chips, we're just throwing them away because of these progressives who think that the real problem here isn't Hamas. It's us, we the people. And so that's a legal fraternity. And then you add to that, you have progressive security chiefs. We had this incredible story that came out at the end of last week, which was leaks from the National Security Cabinet. That's responsible for making all the decisions on war and peace. There were a lot of really weird things that went on there, but one of them was this exchange. Our defense minister, Yoav Gallant, is sort of the progressive representative or the representative of the progressive security chiefs in the IDF, all of the security geniuses who brought us October 7th because they were sure that Hamas was deterred, and all of those movements towards the border, they were just drills and they didn't really mean it and they didn't really have the capacity, and what they really wanted to do was just get more jobs for their people in the kibbutzim in southern Israel because all they cared about was the material well-being of the people of Gaza, those Hamas terrorists. They weren't ideological. That was just a smaller problem with the Islamic Jihad, but not Hamas. Hamas had been pacified and they were totally deterred. That was what they thought, right? These are the security geniuses who said it was their responsibility what happened on October 7th and proceeded to refuse to resign. That's the chief of staff of the IDF. That's the head of military intelligence. That's the head of Southern Command and a whole bunch of others, the head of IDF operations. Anyway, so these security geniuses are progressives. They think that we can deter our Hamas genocidal enemies. We can deter Hezbollah. We can deter Iran. Right? They're sure of it. They know because they're professional security people and they know. Anyway, Yoav Gallant is their representative in the government. He was supposed to be the government's representative to the progressive security chiefs, but he decided he preferred things the other way. He gets better press that way. So that's another story. I'll get into it in a second. But he went to Washington last week and he got the red carpet treatment from the Biden administration. He met with Blinken, he met with Sullivan, he met with Austin, the Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, Secretary of Defense. He met with the CIA chief. He met with everybody, and everybody was so nice to him that they all convinced him that Israel actually doesn't have to defeat Hezbollah. We can just make a deal with them because, America, they're our friends, and they definitely are on our side. Same thing with Hamas. He went there thinking we had to defeat them, but then they convinced him that, no, we don't really have to defeat them. What we really need to is establish a Palestinian state, and so we have to bring Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, to rule Gaza and throw all of our forces out and everything will be fine because that's what the Americans say in America, right? So we'll get to America in a second. Anyway, so he comes back to Israel with these brilliant ideas of standing down and capitulating to American pressure. And, I mean, they were so nice to him, you know, like, hello. Anyway, so he comes back, he's sitting in the security cabinet, and they're having this discussion about whether we can sue for a deal, a diplomatic deal with Hezbollah. Hezbollah being Iran's, you know, foreign legion that's sitting in Lebanon. Lebanon itself is just a forward operating base against Israel run by Iran that happens to have 5.5 million people who live on it, right? The Lebanese people, otherwise known as. So that's what Lebanon is. It's a missile base. It's an offensive base for ground forces against Israel. Hezbollah runs it for Iran as a legion of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Anyway, so they're definitely going to be interested in the deal. Why? Because America says so, right? And because they've got to be, because we don't want a war, and they're definitely deterred because we've really killed a whole bunch of them. So that's who he comes in and he says, we're going to make a deal with them. And one of the ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir, says, you can't make a deal with Nazis. They're not going to abide by this deal. If we make a deal, then we're going to have another October 7th in the north. What are we going to, like, we can't let people come home under this circumstance. So then you know, they have this discussion, and the claim was made that, no, well, if we go to war with Hezbollah, we're still going to have a deal at the end of the war. Meaning, why don't we have a deal now instead of later? We're going to reach the same place after we fight this war. So if we're going to get a deal no matter what, we might as well do a deal now and not fight a war. So here's the problem, right? No, you don't go to war to get a deal. You go to war to defeat the enemy, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Iran. The whole point of war is to go and defeat your enemy, because you've gotten to a point where you can't deter them. We have no deterrence. Israel has no deterrence. Hello, what was October 7th? That was proving that we have no deterrence. Why is it that after 8 months of fighting, we just got 20 missiles shot from Khan Yunis into southern Israel? Because we haven't restored deterrence, right? That's why. Why is Iran threatening to annihilate Israel if we go to war in Lebanon? Because we don't have deterrence, right? So you can't make a deal without restoring deterrence, and you can't restore deterrence without defeating your enemy. In other words, everything is contingent on defeating your enemy. That's the point of war. It's not to reach a deal. It's not to reach a deal, right? It's to not reach a deal, because you can't make a deal with these people, right? And why don't we understand that? Well, I mean, it's the same concept that informs the decision that we can let 50 terrorists out of prison or out of detention centers, send them back to Gaza, because we're too afraid of the legal fraternity to just keep them there regardless of what the conditions are, because whatever the conditions they may have in Israeli detention centers, they're 1,000 times better than what our people have in Gaza, what the hostages have in Gaza. Okay, there's no comparison. And yet here we are letting them out because our legal fraternity is saying this, and because our progressive military chiefs are saying, well, what does it matter? You know, win, lose. Like, at the end of the day, we just want to make deals. There is no military solution to military problems. We said, oh, it has to be diplomatic anyway. So let's just let them out. Because that's the mindset of the progressive military leader. They have been led to believe, they have come to believe, they are now convinced, it is now an article of faith with these people, that there's no military solution to military problems. We're at war, but you need a diplomatic solution. You need a day after. No, you don't need a day after. You can't get to the day after, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said repeatedly, until you get to through this day. And this day is war. And it can last a day, it can last 6 days, it can last 6 years. But until you get past that war thing, you can't get to the day after the war, because the day after the war only starts after the war is over. And the war can't end until we win. And yet, you know, here we are, nearly 9 months after October 7th, and we have these same stupid, incompetent military leaders who refuse to resign. And of course, if the government, if Bibi tried to fire Gallant, the Supreme Court would come in and say, you can't fire Gallant. If Bibi tried to fire the Attorney General, who comes in with these crazy draconian pro-Hamas demands on the government, then the Supreme Court would say, well, you can't fire her. And until the government stops listening to the Supreme Court, they're going to keep taking it on the chin. And these people are so delusional that they think that the problem is us and not Hamas and not Iran and not Hezbollah. And why is this? It's because the progressive mindset that guides our demented security chiefs, that guides our progressive juristocracy, our legal fraternity that lords over us because we're too timid to tell them to back off and stop listening to them, right? And their ridiculous suicidal demands. They're progressives, and progressive politics, progressive dogma, progressive sociology, progressive jurisprudence, progressive strategy. It's all based on denying reality. It's all based on denying reality because you have an idea. There's no military solution. Everything is a diplomatic issue. Everything is a negotiation. Everything is about getting to yes, like a Harvard negotiating seminar. And so you really just want to get a point where you can get to a deal. But if you're dealing with an enemy that wants to annihilate you, as Israel's enemies do, then you can't get to a deal because the only deal they'll accept is the one where we're all dead and they get our land. That's called a zero-sum game. Either we win or they do. And they just refuse to accept that. The progressive mindset cannot see October 7th for what it was. Because if they do, then their whole world explodes. It blows up. And they're not willing to have that happen, so they maintain faith with pure lies, with lies that scream out from every quarter. You know, they had this, the Supreme Court now is adjudicating this petition from the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, and there are these 4 young female attorneys there for the Association of Civil Rights in Israel. Some also work for the Public Defender's Office, and they're all NIF related. They're all New Israel funded attorneys. And I'll just show you the picture. Here they are. These are all these progressive attorneys. And, you know, they woke up Thursday morning, and then Sunday morning again. They put on their legal robes, right? And they got out of bed. They go to plead the case of the people who raped our women, who murdered our babies, who tortured our citizens on October 7th. Pleading the case that they need better food. That's what interests to them. That's what winds their clock. They don't think for a second about the implications of what they do. And so there was this member of Knesset, Almog Cohen, who is from Ofakim, one of the cities that was invaded on October 7th, and he's a former counter-terror officer in the police. And so he and his friends were fighting all day long against these terrorists. And he comes to the hearing in the Supreme Court. He says, "What are you guys doing? How can you be doing this? What's your problem?" They don't even see him. You know, they don't even see him. He comes there saying, "How can you do this? How can you wake up in the morning and fight for the rights of the people who burned us alive on October 7th? How can you do that?" No, from their perspective, he doesn't exist. He's the bad guy. Or if he exists, he's the bad guy. We're all the bad guys. We, the people, are the bad guys. They are fighting for justice and for social justice by fighting for the dietary equality of the meals that are being fed to these monsters, to these Nazis. That's what winds their clock. That's what makes them happy. That's what makes them feel fulfilled as progressive lawyers, because they think that that's what has to happen. You know, I mean, what are you going to do with that? And here I think, you know, we have to realize something fundamental about the progressive mindset. It's all a lie. It's all a lie. The idea that, you know, there's something inherently evil about Zionism or about Americanism. You know, we were born in sin of some sort. Like Israel is a colonial. Like there is no colonial. How can you say that Israel is a colonialist state? I mean, we're the first people in history to proclaim ourselves a nation and to seek self-determination in our land. It's in the Bible. I mean, we accepted our identity as a nation at Mount Sinai, and we never abandoned it, not once in, 100 generations. There is no nation that's more obviously a nation than the Jewish nation. And yet the progressive mindset says that the Jews aren't a nation. The Jews aren't a nation. And that we have no right to the land of Israel. And there's no nationalism without the Bible. You can't understand the nation state unless you realize that it's predicated on the Jewish people and their nation state in the land of Israel. You can't understand anything about the world that we live in if you don't first accept the fact that that the first nation and the first nation state were the Jews in the land of Israel. You can't. And so here they come and they say, no, we're, and it's the same thing with the way that they treat America. The United States of America, I mean, boy, oh boy, do I have criticism. And you hear it all the time against progressive leaders in the United States. Why? Because the United States, until they came along, was the most successful, most powerful exemplar of what free people can do when they live in a constitutional democracy in the history of humanity, right? Look at what they did. They brought more prosperity, more freedom to more people over a larger landmass than any people in the world ever. They weren't an empire, although they did some imperialist things. But they were the last great hope of mankind. How can you look at the United States and not see the justice in that country? But you can if your whole dogma, if your whole worldview is based on lying to yourself, being told lies, accepting lies as truth, and then building your entire life around fighting for the lies that you've accepted as your mode of thinking. You can't. So, recently, right, over the past year, you might say, or even over the past 4 years, we've seen both the ascendance and the crash of the progressive vision for organizing human societies. So, for instance, in Israel, when did it all crash and burn? On October 7th. I mean, it had been crashing and burning for a long time when we had these elites, these same lawyers, marching in the streets, and they're doing it again now, setting things on fire, calling for civil war, and actually carrying out a largely nonviolent but certainly very serious civil war against the people of Israel, delegitimizing our right to vote, right? Because we voted wrong, and therefore the outcome of the elections are illegitimate, and we have to overthrow the government. They do, because how dare we vote wrongly, right? So that's what they did. They went to war against the people who had made a decision that they didn't like, and they considered that decision incorrect and illegitimate because they didn't like it, because they lost. That's what we saw. That was the first thing. So we saw everybody talking about democracy, that they're all anti-democratic, because that when they talk about we the people, they mean 5% of the people, and the rest of us just have to obey them. They get to take control of all of the organs of power in Israel, whether it's the general staff of the army or the legal system or the media. And if we don't like it, we're illegitimate. We're enemies of democracy. Why? Because they don't like our positions, and they don't like how we vote, and they don't like what we like to read, and they don't like what we like to say. So we're bad. We're the root of all evil, not Hamas. But let's get to Hamas in a second. So that's what we saw in the prelude to October 7th. October 7th, everything came crashing down. And since then, their refusal to resign, their insistence on maintaining their slavish devotion to the legal fraternity and its demented concepts of what, a war is supposed to be about and what you're fighting for, which is totally at odds with everything that the soldiers in the field understand and their commanders understand. And then anybody who criticizes the general staff of the army is totally illegitimate. How dare you? You're criticizing the army when you're criticizing the chief of staff, who is so responsible for what happened from the Israeli side on October 7th. Right? He didn't even wake up the prime minister. If the prime minister and the defense minister had been notified that Hamas had just turned on tens of thousands of SIM cards, Israeli SIM cards, signaling an imminent invasion of Israel, they would have demanded that they wake up all of the soldiers and put them on guard and bring in reinforcements and bring in the Air Force. It's obvious that would have happened, but Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff of the IDF, was so certain that he knows better than the government, that he's supposed to be the one in charge, that he didn't bother to wake anybody up. So he made the decision to go back to sleep, and then at 6:30 in the morning, what happened. And he refuses to resign. Actually, at the National Security Cabinet meeting last week, so Bezalel Smotrich, and I think the Justice, who's the finance minister, and Justice Minister Yariv Levin, started asking very, very critical questions of Halevi. And Halevi started yelling at them, how dare you speak to me that way? How dare you cast aspersions on me? And Smotrich was quoted as saying something along the lines of, what are you talking about? You're the one who went to sleep on October 6th. And then Herzl Levy demanded an immediate apology for this. This is a statement of truth. Why should he apologize? He did apologize in the end. Whatever, yeah, I'm sorry, But he's right. And Halevi won't quit. And Gallant won't fire him. Netanyahu can't fire Gallant because if he does, the justices will overthrow the firing. And, all of the elites, all of the brilliant people who are behind this whole progressive revolution will set the world on fire, right, and go abroad to say that the Israeli government is anti-democratic and nobody should support it and everybody should boycott Israel and nobody should sell its arms, right? And that's what will happen. So you can't fire the defense minister who won't fire the chief of staff. You can't fire the attorney general who is making all of these cockamamie decisions that undermine our war effort, because if you do, the same thing will happen. So we're stuck with these people in positions of power that are undermining our war effort. And then if you attack them, you're attacking the IDF. No, we're not. We're attacking you. So, all right, why is this happening? Is that just happening in Israel? Like I said, it's happening in America too. What happened last Thursday night? Last Thursday night, the whole lie of Joe Biden collapsed. The whole lie of Joe Biden collapsed. Everybody knows that he suffers from dementia. Everybody knows he suffers from dementia. We've known this forever, right? We knew this 5 years ago. The fact that it may be more advanced now is neither here nor there. He should never have run for president. He ran for president because he was supposed to be this avatar for moderate Democrats. He wasn't because he's not in a position to be anything really, as we saw on Thursday night. But, there was nobody else that they could put forward as a viable candidate who could beat Bernie Sanders. So they said he was a moderate. They brought him in. They said he's a moderate, and people voted for him because they didn't want Bernie Sanders. In the event, you got Joe Biden in the White House, who is compromised because he suffers from dementia, but you got Bernie Sanders' policies in the White House because Joe Biden isn't really in charge, and everybody he hired or was brought in for him to hire are progressives who all embrace lies. That's their worldview, is lies. So last Thursday at the debate, it all crashed. It all crashed because Biden got out there for 90 minutes and he mumbled. And he made incoherent statements. And he didn't finish sentences. And nothing he said made sense, really. And then he got really mad. And he said nasty things about Donald Trump. But he wasn't really there. And it became undeniable. And so all of these journalists who had been covering him for the past 4 years suddenly said, I'm shocked to see gambling going on here, They're channeling their best Peter Lorre from Casablanca. How is it possible that they hid this from us? Nobody hid anything from you. I saw it. Everybody saw it. You gaslighted the American public into saying that their version of reality was immoral, and therefore they had to pretend away everything that they saw, not believe their own lying eyes, but actually believe your lies. And now suddenly caught, they all say, oh, we didn't do that. We were lied to. We didn't know. In the White House, they're saying, it's all Jill Biden's fault. We didn't know. She blocked our access to the prime minister from the president. Oh, right, Crimea River. That's not true. Everybody knew what was going on with Biden. And so the lie crashed, and they're trying to figure out what to do. But, of course, this wasn't the first lie that crashed. The gender ideology thing. That crashed when people started seeing that their children were being indoctrinated with snuff films of porno, in first grade or fifth grade or seventh grade or 11th grade, and you had these school board meetings. So then what do? They said the parents Merrick Garland said that the parents should be treated as domestic terrorists. People saw that too. So in order to require you to allow your child to be indoctrinated with gay porn, right, at public schools, the federal government said that parents were violent domestic terrorists. You have prison reform, which means letting people out of jail whole scale every day and not enforcing laws and making cities unlivable in the United States. It means not enforcing hate laws against anti-Semitism and allowing Jews to be terrorized all over the streets of the United States. And then saying every time that you condemn anti-Semitism, you also condemn Islamophobia, which means that you're not going to do anything to fight anti-Semitism. Or you're going to put together a task force for fighting anti-Semitism and man it with people who are anti-Semites. So, that's what the White House kept doing. The thing is that, lie after lie, whether it's, the transgenderism or the crime stuff or the immigration stuff or the anti-Semitism stuff, people from all walks of life are being harmed by these policies, these very progressive policies that are predicated on progressive ideology that says that the world as we know it is evil and that reality is bad and that anybody who notices reality is bad and that we're going to force this dogma down your throats and we don't care if it endangers you because we know better than you do that you're the real danger, not Hamas, not criminals prowling the streets of New York and San Francisco, not millions of illegal immigrants coming in and taking over all the public spaces in every urban environment in the United States. None of that is important. None of that is evil. Us doing these things is not evil. What's evil, or letting terrorists out of jail, right, sending them back into the battlefield so that our sons can be forced to fight them over and over and over again, endangering their own lives. None of that is evil. We're evil for noticing it. We're evil for wanting to defeat this. We're evil for not wanting these policies. And the question is, how long is this going to be allowed to go on for? How long is this going to be allowed to go on for? And I don't really know the answer to that. In the United States, something really interesting happened. So, Barack Obama, who really launched America on this ride with his presidency and then post-presidency, he came in and said, Joe is fine. He just had a bad night. I know what bad nights are. And so immediately making clear that he wants to keep backing Joe Biden. Then I saw somebody, Tucker Carlson, who I don't like for a number of reasons, but say, maybe he's right. He claims that he has a good source on this, that actually Obama was just saying that and that he really wants to replace Biden and make the Democratic convention an open convention and bring somebody else in to replace him, whoever that may be, for instance, Michelle Obama. And so the idea is that, okay, we were caught in this lie that Biden is competent to be the president and that he's not suffering from dementia. And so now we're going to fix it. We're going to bring in somebody else. But then the question becomes, all right, so what you're telling the American people is true. We totally lied for 4 years, 5 years about Biden, but now trust us. We're going to bring in Gavin Newsom or Michelle Obama or somebody else, and they're going to be great. And then believe that the problem isn't the policies that have been put out by the Democrats operating under this, Biden guise, right? It's not our policies. It's not what we're actually doing. It's not that they're all crashing and burning. It's Trump and all of the people who support him. It's we the people. It's 80 million Americans who voted for Trump. It's Trump. It's anybody who doesn't like our policies. Our policies haven't failed. Our lies weren't wrong. You just have to trust us again. And in Israel, it's the same thing. When they come to us and they say that, it's anti-democratic for the ministers who were elected by we the people to criticize these failed security chiefs who have failed to win this war after 9 months, who failed to understand that they're supposed to win the war because they think that they're supposed to just get to yes with Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran and everything will be fine. Let's just restore deterrence, whatever that means. And deterrence really means whatever we say it means because we get to decide because we're the professionals, right? A minister who questions that insanity, he's the problem. He's anti-democratic. And the unelected, incompetent generals, they're the solution. And we're supposed to be with them. The lawyers who are saying that we have to, give the terrorists who carried out October 7th better diets than the average Israeli has time to make for himself, that or afford, they're not the problem. The problem is, the elected officials and we the people who elected them who are saying we have to win this war. And you don't win the war by demoralizing the public and by empowering our enemies by letting out people like the director of Shifa terror base, a.k.a. Shifa Hospital. Okay, you don't. You don't win this war by going to radical Supreme Court justices and getting, better conditions in prison for for rapists from Hamas. You don't. We're the problem. Reality is the problem. I know Israelis have had it with this. I'm pretty sure that Americans have had it with this. The question is whether we're just going to continue to be suckered and intimidated. We're going to continue to take it and allow people to tell us that our lying eyes are lying to us when they're telling us the truth. That reality is whatever, Nostrum, some college professor who hates America or hates Israel, comes up with at any given moment, and then sells to the Democratic Party or to, Israeli leftist elites. Is that going to continue to happen? One of the politicians, probably Simcha Rothman, but I'm not sure who was here, a guest on the show, I think a couple of times, and he's the head of the Knesset Constitution, Law and Justice Committee, and I think it was he that made this statement earlier this week. He said, this is only going to end, this insanity of the state's attorney, the attorney general and the Supreme Court and all the rest of this, when we stop obeying their orders, when we just say no. And that may be correct. We tried reform and they set the country on fire, and then they seized for themselves more rights, more powers. So we just have to say, no, you don't have this power anymore. I think, people always look at Andrew Johnson, the seventh American president. Andrew Jackson, sorry, I said Johnson. He was a lame-o, came after Abraham Lincoln and ruined Reconstruction. But anyway, Andrew Jackson, they look at him and they say, he was lawless. He didn't listen to the Supreme Court. And I don't want to get into the whole thing. Maybe the Supreme Court was correct. Maybe Jackson was correct. It depends on how you look at manifest destiny and how you look at America's expansion to the West. But the Supreme Court said that he wasn't allowed to expel the Indians of Georgia, I think it was, in what was later referred to as the Trail of Tears. And Andrew Jackson said, well, if the Chief Justice wants to stop me, he can come and stop me, And that's looked at as a terrible thing. But I think that and that may be true. Maybe Andrew Jackson was a terrible man, and he should never have done that. And America should never have settled the West, and they should have just remained along the Atlantic coastline. I don't know. But what you saw there was a clash of two arms of government. And what Jackson said was, I was elected by the people. I'm the head of the executive branch of the government. And unless something is unconstitutional, the Supreme Court doesn't have a right to tell me that I can't do something. And I reject the constitutional argument at the heart of the Supreme Court's determination that I'm not allowed to do what I've set out to do, which is to expel the native tribes of Georgia westward. Right? That's basically what it was, if I remember my U.S. history correctly. And he won. And he won because he is the executive. But here in Israel, we have a situation where the bureaucracy, which is supposed to be subordinate to the government, has subordinated itself to the Supreme Court. And as a result, it's like you're holding a wheel, but there's nothing connected to it, and so you can't get anything done without the permission of the Supreme Court. And unless you fix that, you can't fix it because they keep appointing themselves. They appoint their generals. They appoint the heads of the Shin Bet that they like. They appoint the heads of the police commissioners that they like. And if you like somebody else, you can't get them appointed, even though you're the one who was elected. So at the end of every stupid decision that we make in Israel, that the Americans make in the United States, there's a progressive with power or a dupe who isn't progressive, who thinks that he can coddle them into doing what he wants, or he can appease them and then win their support and their backing, and then he becomes, unfireable, like Gallant. But in the meantime, he's undermining the interests of the nation because he's going along with these people who think that reality is racist or reality is evil, and that what's really the right thing to do is make a deal with the Palestinians who want to annihilate the Jews, get to yes with people who want to burn all of our people. There is no military solution to a military problem, only appeasement. That's what you do. So it's either a progressive or a dupe who thinks that he can appease them. That's it. Until we defeat this progressive dogma until we push these people out of power, we're going to continue seeing decisions like the decision to let the head of Shifa out of prison and back to Gaza. We're going to continue to see situations where people are lied to about who they're electing in the United States because they get away with it. So why wouldn't they keep doing it? It's up to us to prevent them from getting away with it ever again. That's our job. The lies have all crashed. They've all burned, literally, in many cases. So we just have to walk away and walk forward, because otherwise I don't know how we survive this. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I'll have more later on this week. Take care.